Thank you, Adrian. So this is a joint work with Adrian Gonzalez Casanova, Arnaud Sirigegus, who is also at UNAM in Mexico, and Emmanuel Scherzer. So we are back to the topic of the first 2 days of the conference, so collaborations with Adrian and or Emmanuel. So I'm going to present 2 parts. So the first part is a joint work with Adrian and Emmanuel with Adrian and Arnaud that is already published, and the last part is work also with Emmanuel that we were trying to finish this week. So as a little introduction, we are going to consider the Wright-Fisher model that Jason already introduced quite in detail during his talk. So in this Wright-Fisher model, time goes from here to here. We have a population of fixed size n, and at every generation, each individual chooses his parent at random from the individuals in the previous generation. So if you assume that there are 2 types here that are colored in pink and white, each individual will inherit the type of his parent. So if you consider that xt is the proportion of, let's say, pink individuals in this population, then when you rescale time and you take the population size to infinity, this frequency process will converge to the Wright-Fisher diffusion, which is the solution of this SDE, where Bt is a standard Brownian motion. So as some of the other speakers already explained, if you take a sample of individuals from the present generation and you trace back the ancestry, so you look at this graph that connects each individual to his or her parent, you get a tree. And again, if you properly rescale time and take the population size 10 to infinity, this object converges to the Kingman coalescent, which is this object that is a partition valued process in which blocks merge at size 1. So basically the block counting process, so the process that tells you how many lineages you have in the Kingman coalescent, jumps from n to n-1 at rate n chooses 2. So the important topic of the day, there is a moment duality relation between this diffusion and the block counting process of the Kingman coalescent. I did not put nice little arrows, but now it's something that I will start doing now. Yeah, so that's a classical Wright-Fisher model and Kingman coalescent. Something important that I did not write down in my slides, but one important property that I wanted to comment about the Kingman coalescent is coming down from infinity. So this means that if you start the coalescent from an infinite number of lineages, you want to know whether at any finite time you will have a finite number of lineages. Okay, this is called coming down from infinity. And the standard Kingman coalescent comes down from infinity. And you can also ask yourself, what is the speed of coming down from infinity? So if you look at like very small intervals of time close to 0, at which speed do the number of blocks decrease? And in the Kingman coalescent, it's well known that it decreases like 1 divided by t squared for small periods of time. We will see that later why this is important. So the topic of this talk is to go from this simple Wright-Fisher model to Wright-Fisher models in which there is some demographic variation. In particular, we are interested in demographic bottlenecks. So what is a demographic bottleneck? Imagine we have our population of constant size, and sometimes there's some catastrophe or some bad season or whatever, and the population size drops and becomes really small. So this is a bottleneck. So we are going to imagine that in our population, there are recurrent demographic bottlenecks, okay? So you have a population of fixed size, very big, here 8 in my picture, but imagine much more. And sometimes you have a bottleneck, here the bottleneck lasts for 2 generations, and here you have a bottleneck that is longer, that lasts for 4 generations. Okay, we will distinguish between drastic bottlenecks when the population size during the bottleneck is small and doesn't tend to infinity, even when I will make the population size outside the bottleneck tend to infinity. And soft bottlenecks when the population size during the bottleneck is small, but still tends to infinity when I scale the model. And the bottlenecks that we will mostly discuss during this talk are these drastic bottlenecks. Okay, so what we did in the paper with Adrian and Arno was look at different types of bottlenecks, so drastic and soft and short and long. So we consider that they are short if they last for only one generation and long if they last for several generations. So we characterize the genealogy of this process, so the coalescent, for all these type of bottlenecks. So for example, if your bottlenecks are soft, what you get is a time rescaling of the Kingman coalescent. If they're short, you will get like a continuous time rescaling. But if they're long, you will get a rescaling by a subordinator, so by a jump process. However, when the bottlenecks are drastic and short, you get the symmetric coalescent, which is the object of study of the first part of this talk. So let's first construct the model, the Wright-Fisher model with bottleneck forwards in time, and then we will study its dual, the symmetric coalescent. So let's consider a sequence of population sizes R, so that is constructed in the following way. So you take a sequence of i.i.d. Bernoulli random variables of some parameter that scales with the population size like this. Okay, and when your Bernoulli random variable is equal to 0, which happens most of the time, the population size is equal to n. But when your Bernoulli random variable is equal to 1, then your population size is chosen according to some measure in the natural numbers that we denote by f. So you can consider that f is simply a probability measure, or you can consider that f is an infinite measure, and in this case you need to do some rescaling here, but I'm not going to go through those technical details. And the first result we got is that in this process, if you consider the frequency process, so again, you assume you have two types of individuals, and you look at the frequency of one type of individual, it converges to this diffusion process, where here you have this term that is the classic Wright-Fisher diffusion. And then you have a jump term here that corresponds to what happens during the bottlenecks. Okay, so each time there is a demographic bottleneck and your population is reduced, you can have jumps in the diffusion process. So if you remember Jason talk, when he talked about lambda coalescent, he had a kind of a similar term, but here it's a bit different. So what is going to happen is that when there is a bottleneck that reduces the population size to k, this k here, the diffusion process has to jump to some number that is something divided by k, because you only have k individuals, so the frequency has to be some number divided by k. And you will, if you take a sequence of Bernoulli random variables, okay, with whenever this Bernoulli is small, this uniform in 0, 1 is smaller than the frequency, the individual that survives is of your type of interest. And then you jump to, like you count how many individuals of your type survive to the bottleneck, and if it's 3, you jump to 3 divided by k. Okay, so if you look at this picture, so that will happen. You have like a Wright-Fisher diffusion, then you have a bottleneck. Here we were lucky and more individuals of our type survived, so we had a positive jump, but you can also have negative jumps. And then outside the bottleneck, you still have a normal Wright-Fisher diffusion, and then you have a bottleneck and you jump again. What happens from the point of view of the genealogy? So if we trace backwards in time the ancestry of a sample of individuals, outside the bottlenecks, so we know that the dual of a classic Wright-Fisher diffusion is a Kingman coalescent. So here, if we go backwards in time, outside the bottlenecks, we will have a normal Kingman coalescent. But when we encounter a bottleneck, okay, imagine here we have a bottleneck and only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals survive to the bottleneck, okay? All individuals have to choose a parent among these 5 individuals that are the only survivors of that demographic bottleneck. So then, since all the lineages that remain, that can be many, have to choose a parent among these 5 individuals, what you have is a multiple merger event. So which means that you can have several blocks merging into the same block and into many blocks at the same time. So then we arrive to, so then the genealogy of this population is a Xi-coalescent. So it's a coalescent with multiple mergers, and which looks like this, and that you can construct in the following way. So we are going to consider Kingman's paintbox construction. So Kingman's paintbox construction is a way to construct coalescence in a sort of in a Poissonian way. So at some rate, you will choose a partition of the interval 0, 1. So let's say that a rate, so Xi is the measure on the partitions of the interval 0, 1. So at rate Xi of Xi, you choose this partition of the interval 0, 1. And then to each lineage that you had before this time, let's assume here we are at this time here, to each lineage that is present in the population, you assign a uniform random variable in the interval 0, 1. And you throw these variables in the interval 0, 1. And you look at the uniform variables that fell in the same color, and you merge them together. So for example, here we have 4 lineages that fell in the pink, and this would correspond to these 4 lineages that merged together here. Here we had 2 that fell in the blue, so this could be these 2 in the yellow, these 2, and the rest fall in the last segment of the partition, the one that is in black, which means that they don't have to merge with anyone, okay? So basically, more formally, this means that from measures in the set of exchangeable random partitions in 0, 1, you can, to each measure, you can assign a coalescent that you will construct this way. And the in our case, the coalescent that arises from our Wright-Fisher model is the symmetric coalescent that has the following property, is that its characteristic measure, Xi, only take values in this type of partitions in the interval 0, 1. So I just take a number k and cut 0, 1 in k intervals of the same size. So it's quite simple. And we proved that if you take the measure Xi like this, so you choose the partition in k little segments at rate f of k divided by k, where f is my measure that was telling me each time I have a bottleneck in my population, the population size is decreased to something with that is given by this f. Okay, and we proved that this symmetric coalescent is the moment dual of the exhaustive, which is my Wright-Fisher diffusion with bottleneck, the one that had little jumps. Why do we call it symmetric coalescent? Because it has a very nice geometric property. That is this one, is that under this symmetric coalescent, if I take any, so if I have a tree, I cut any branch of the tree and I paste it anywhere else, but at the same height, or I cut this one and I paste it here. All these trees have the same probability under the symmetric coalescent. So it's invariant via this transformation that consists in cutting and pasting branches. So it's very cool. We like the symmetric coalescent a lot. And we are interested in whether this symmetric coalescent comes down from infinity. Okay, so there, and we know that from an article by Jason, that for Xi-coalescent that are supported in the set of finite measures, which means that you got 0, 1 in a finite number of a little of bit, to know if they come down from infinity, you have to check that this is true, so this property on the characteristic measure. And we know that in the case of our symmetric coalescent, this is true if our measure f is infinite. Okay, so now let's complicate things a bit more. And we are going to consider another class of Xi-coalescents that arise from a slightly more complicated model. So now consider that you have a population. There is a bottleneck, okay? So here we have a bottleneck when only 4 individuals survive, okay? But now, after the bottleneck, it takes some time to the population to get back to its original size, okay? So right after the bottleneck, what will happen is that the individual will start to reproduce. So imagine you have like a branching process, and each of these 4 individuals will have some progeny, and until we get back to the normal population size. Okay. For example, if all these individuals are of the same type, and then you have just a normal branching process with constant rate, we know that we can characterize the law of the size of the progeny of each of the individuals who survive. Okay. And now what we are interested in is in looking at the genealogy of this type of trees. And we did not prove it formally, but what should be happening is that the genealogy of this type of tree looks like a general family of Xi-coalescents that are generated by partitions in the following way. So imagine that at rate R of K, you generate a partition of the interval 0, 1 like this. So you have a collection of variables W with some law on 0 infinity. And to generate the partition, you just take each component and then you divide by the sum, okay? So in my previous example, the W's would be the size of the progeny of each of the individuals who survive. And I just generate a partition of 0, 1 from this. We are going to assume that the rate at which these events occur, so which correspond to bottlenecks of size k, is proportional to k to the minus alpha for some alpha in the interval 0, 1. And we are going to assume that we have this property in the law of the W's. And again, we are going to generate coalescent. If you want to see the paint box construction, the Kingman paint box construction, at rate R of K, we choose this partition of the interval 0, 1. We are going to throw again uniform random variables and construct our Xi-coalescent in this way. Okay, so we are again interested in knowing whether this family of Xi-coalescent come down from infinity. And we're even interested in a bit more because we are interested in knowing the frequency of the blocks of a given size. So we are going to consider this process mu t, where mu t of I is the number of blocks that contain I elements in my coalescent. So the sum of the mu ti's would be the total number of blocks in the total number of lineages. But we consider this vector that basically tells me like how many blocks of each size I have in the coalescent. And we are going to rescale this process. So we are going to rescale the number of blocks by n, and to rescale time by n divided by n to the 1 minus alpha. Okay. So we are going to assume that we start with many blocks, but we rescale time this way to see what happens close to the origin. Okay. So then we have this process mu t that takes values in this space, which is basically a subset of L1 of R, where you have this property that is always satisfied, because like since block only merge, the sum of the sizes of the blocks will always be equal to n. And we are going to construct, we can construct this process in the following way. So what will happen is that each lineage of each block of the coalescent of a certain size is like a ball that has a certain number, that we, in the same way as we do our Kingman paint box construction, we are going to assign balls to urns or intervals of size P1, P2, etc. Okay, so this defines a sort of coagulation operator lambda k of n that we are going to, that is this, that, so basically when you merge blocks, you sum the sizes of the blocks. So basically in this earn process is like, for example, here I merge a block of size 3 with a block of size 2 and I form a block of size 5. So it's a discrete coagulation operator. And this process has this generator. So Rk is the rate at which k events, partitions of size k arrive, and I coagulate my lineages according to this discrete coagulation operator. Now we want to see what happens when I start with a very large number of lineages. So, like if I have an problem with a very big number of balls, and I'm going also to assume that I have many urns in which I assign my balls, because basically you see from this generator that what you have most often is events with large k. And we will see that this coagulation operator will converge to a continuous coagulation operator that looks like this. Okay. So basically, the intuition under for this is the following. So imagine that we are assigning balls into urns, where balls have different weights. For the moment, let's assume that you only have balls of weight 1, okay, and you have n balls and k urns, and they are both very large, but they satisfy this. So n divided by k is of order 1. Okay. So then it's known that the number of balls that falls in an urn will be on average this, where Zn of I is the number of balls of size I that you have. Well, n times this is the number of balls that you have. And moreover, you have a Poisson approximation, which basically tells you that the number of urns that will contain k balls is Poisson distributed. So the number of boxes that contain R balls of type I will be well approximated by this. So that if now you consider that you have balls of different weights, okay, then you expect that the number of boxes that contain, such that the sum of the weights is equal to L. Okay, so you want to know how many lineages of size L you will create. So this will correspond to urn, so that the sum of the balls is L. Okay, so then you have to know that, for example, if I want to make blocks of size 3, I can have either 3 balls of size 1 or 2 balls of size 1 ball of size 1 and 1 ball of size 2, etc. So this is what we call the compositions of size L, C, and each composition of C means that you assign C1 balls of size 1, C2 balls of size 2, etc. And since the number is well approximated by a Poisson, then the probability of that the sum of the balls is L is given by this formula, which is, I mean, you can look at it, you can convince yourself that this is the probability that Poisson of that many Poissons are equal to C1, C2, C something. Okay. So then we did some Stein approximation to like prove that actually in this urn problem this Poisson approximation is good, let's say, and we managed to prove that using this you can prove convergence of the generator and prove that our process mu t of n converges to some process mu t, where mu t is the solution to this martingale problem. So this is a martingale problem where the generator is A, and the generator A is this thing. So remember that you were throwing events at rate k to the minus alpha. So then when this becomes this x to the minus alpha that you have here, and here the coagulation operator that you have is this thing that I had defined here. So this sort of Poisson coagulation of things. where this gamma is the random variable that basically gives me what's the size of the balls, of the urns, sorry. Okay, so basically, yeah, here I have again the description of the coagulation operator C. So basically what let me recapitulate what we are doing. So we took this vector that counts how many blocks of size 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. you have in your coalescent. We wrote the discrete generator of this thing using some balls and urns. We assumed that we had many balls and many urns, so we had this Poisson approximation, which gave me not so nice continuous coagulation operator. And then we found that this process converges to some process mu t, which has this generator. And what does it tell us? Okay, so first, this process mu t that has a quite ugly generated, but you can prove that it is a self-similar process. Okay, so it's self-similar with some index beta, which is equal to alpha minus 1. So it's self-similar with negative index. And using this self-similarity, we can take the Lamperti transform of the block counting process. So for those who are not very familiar with this, what we are doing is that we are considering this process psi of t, which is minus the log of mu of some time change of mu. So norm of mu is the block counting process of the coalescent. We are considering this change of time and considering minus the log of this. I mean, I'm not an expert on Lamperti transform, but I spent some time in Mexico, so I think I got something out of it. And then what we know is that psi of t is a subordinator, okay? Which means basically that then your block counting process is the exponential of minus at time change subordinator. Okay, but we can do a little bit more. So this is the normal Lamperti transform, but we want to do a multidimensional Lamperti transform, okay? So remember that we are not interested only in the block counting process, but in this vector that counts all the block sizes, okay? So we will consider the block counting process like this and the asymptotic frequencies of all the sizes. So mu1 divided by the norm, mu2 divided. So this is like the frequency of singleton, the frequency of pairs, etc. Okay. And we are going to prove that this thing is a Markov additive process. Markov additive process. So Markov additive process here is the definition of what it is. So how much time do I have? Okay. Basically, Markov additive process is a process that satisfies this property, which basically says that you have one component that is the subordinator and another component which is the spherical component, and basically the jumps of the subordinator control the rates of the other process. Okay, so what we prove is that if we take like the Lamperti transform of we take the multidimensional Lamperti transform, and then you have this process psi t that is defined like this, and theta t, which is the spherical component, and it's a Markov additive process. And then back to our problem of coming down from infinity. Okay, now we know that our block counting process is the exponential of a time change subordinator. Okay, what was known before for Xi-coalescents is that if so Limit in 2010 proved that for Xi-coalescents that come down from infinity, if you satisfy this regularity condition, I mean, this is for Xi-coalescents that are again supported on finite partitions, which is our case. If you satisfy this condition, then you can prove that there is a speed of coming down from infinity, meaning that you can find a function nu of t that satisfies this property, which is like saying that you are coming down from infinity at this speed. Okay. Our Xi-coalescents do not satisfy this regularity assumption, and what we get is that. So what we realize that is in our case where we are not satisfying this regularity assumption, there is no speed of coming down from infinity. You cannot approximate it by a continuous function, because your block counting process, even in the limit, it's a jump process. So your process, what it's doing is like jumping down from infinity. How much time do you have, Adrian? More than enough. Okay. Okay. Then to get almost every word of the title of the conference in my presentation, I have a stochastic flow. Okay, so we are going to take this radial component, theta t. So remember, theta t is the asymptotic frequencies of singleton, pairs, triplets, etc. Okay, and we are going to look at its generating function. So this function like this. So you take some. Some lambda and you consider the generating function, okay? And we are going to define this process x indexed by lambda, which is this, where x of time 0 is lambda, okay? So what we have is, if we define these two functions like this, then our process, our xt of lambda, is the strong solution to this SDE. So then you can define a stochastic flow indexed by lambda. So basically, what is doing is that the generating function of the asymptotic frequencies satisfies this SDE. So it jumps at some times, and it does this type of jumps. I mean, to me, they don't mean, I don't have a clear interpretation of this. And at the jump times of the same Poisson process, the block counting process jumps to this thing. And yes, then we prove that the solution of the strong solution of this SDE has the same law as the Markov additive process that was the multidimensional Lamperti transform of our process. And finally, if I can go very quickly, we apply this to obtain the side frequency spectrum of our coalescent. So the side frequency spectrum is a statistic that is widely used in population genetics, which basically counts. So if you have mutations, it counts how many mutations are present in only one individual of the sample, 2 individuals of the sample, 3, 4, 5, etc. So it's this histogram of the frequency. And the side frequency spectrum is related to like the shape of the tree, because if you add mutations into a tree, you will see that if you have very long external branches, then you will have more mutations present in only one individual, while if you have more internal branches, you will have more mutations present in more individuals. So it kind of characterizes the genealogy. And for this type of Xi-coalescent, we proved that if you take Fn be the side frequency spectrum, we can, using the Lamperti transform, characterize. So we know that for a large n, it converges to this thing that again depends on the subordinator and on the radial part of the Markov additive process. In addition, to finish, we also prove for the symmetric coalescent, for the nice one that I presented at the beginning, we could, using a technique that is called phase type distribution, in which Arno is an expert, and with some colleague that is a computer scientist and is very good at counting partitions. He wrote a very efficient algorithm so that we can compute like exactly. So this is not a simulation, it's an exact computation, the side frequency spectrum symmetric coalescence, and we can have like the expectation, the second moment, and whatever moments you want. And we realized that normally the side frequency spectrum of King-1 coalescent, for example, decays like 1 divided by x. Here, when we have symmetric coalescence, we have peaks appearing in the side frequency spectrum. And depending on the sample size, you can have more or less peaks. So it becomes like a peaky side frequency spectrum. And here is some data that I stole from Elise Cardon-Cuff, who is a colleague of mine. We were doing our PhD in Paris at the same time, but she's more biologist. Well, and we have this side frequency spectrum of mosquitoes that has a nice peak in the model. And maybe it means that maybe it's a signal of demographic bottlenecks. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, I'm happy to take them.